The Australian Outback is a land of silence, a place where the horizon never seems to end, and where secrets don't fade with time. In this country, distance is dangerous, isolation is absolute, and once something disappears, it can be gone forever. In the summer of 1966, 3 children stepped into that silence. They weren't explorers, they weren't lost travelers, they were siblings, they were innocent, and they were never seen again. Their names were Jane, Anna, and Grant Beaumont. What happened to them would become one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in Australian history, a case that shattered the nation's sense of safety and proved that even in broad daylight, evil can walk unnoticed. This is the true story of the Beaumont Children. On the morning of January 26, 1966, it was Australia Day, a national holiday. In the quiet suburb of Somerton Park, just outside Adelaide, Nancy Beaumont watched her 3 children prepare for the day. 9-year-old Jane was responsible beyond her years. 7-year-old Anna followed her everywhere, and 4-year-old Grant clutched his sister's hand. They asked permission to go to Belanglo Beach, a short bus ride away. Nancy agreed. This wasn't unusual. They had made the trip before. Jane carried money for the bus, food, and the return trip home. They promised they'd be back by noon. At 10 a.m., the Beaumont children boarded the bus. It was the last time their mother would ever see them. By noon, Nancy Beaumont stood at the front window, waiting. She wasn't worried at first. Children lost track of time. Buses ran late. But as the minutes passed, unease crept in. By 1 p.m., she began calling friends. By 2:00 p.m., her concern had turned to panic. The children never came home. When police were notified, officers initially assumed the same thing Nancy had, that the kids had missed a bus. But as the hours stretched into evening, the reality became impossible to ignore. 3 children had vanished in one of the most public places imaginable, a crowded beach, on a national holiday. In broad daylight, something was very wrong. Police rushed to Belanglo Beach. That's when the witnesses came forward. Multiple people reported seeing the Beaumont children throughout the day. They weren't alone. Several witnesses described a man with them. He was tall, athletic, deeply tanned, blonde hair, early 30s. Witnesses said the children appeared comfortable with him, relaxed, happy. One woman recalled seeing him carry Grant on his shoulders. Another said the children were laughing, playing games, completely at ease. That detail chilled investigators. Children don't trust strangers like that, unless they've been given a reason to. The final confirmed sighting occurred around 3:00 p.m. The man and the children were seen walking away from the beach. That was it. No screams, no struggle, no trace. Searches began immediately. Police combed the beach, nearby streets, drains, and sand dunes. Nothing, no shoes, no towels, no bags. It was as if the children had been lifted out of existence. As night fell, the temperature dropped, the ocean darkened, and a quiet terror settled over Adelaide. 3 children had vanished, and no one knew where to look. The case exploded across Australia. The Beaumont children were on every newspaper, every television broadcast, every radio station. Police launched the largest search in the nation's history. Thousands of volunteers scoured the countryside. Psychics claimed visions. False leads flooded in. 1 million tips. None led anywhere. Years passed. Then decades. Bones discovered in remote areas were tested, not the children. A wallet allegedly belonging to Jane was found near the beach, and then mysteriously vanished before police could examine it. Each lead dissolved into nothing. The Outback kept its silence. Over the years, several suspects emerged. Men with violent histories. Men who lived nearby. Men who fit the description. One confessed, then recanted. Another was linked through circumstantial evidence. None were charged. The man described by witnesses was never identified. No name, no record. Just a memory, a shadow. Someone who walked into a crowd, and walked out with 3 children, and was never seen again. Nancy Beaumont never stopped searching. For years, she waited. She left the porch light on every night, hoping her children would come home. She believed they were alive, but one day she'd hear a knock, but it never came. Nancy died in 2019. She never learned what happened to her children. No parent should outlive their child. Nancy outlived all 3 without answers. The Beaumont case changed Australia forever. Before 1966, children rode buses alone, played freely, trusted strangers. After the Beaumont children disappeared, that innocence was gone. Parents stopped letting children wander. Doors were locked. Trust died quietly. Because if 3 children could vanish in daylight anywhere, then nowhere was truly safe. Some mysteries fade with time. This one only grows darker. Somewhere someone knows what happened to Jane, Anna, and Grant Beaumont, and until the truth is revealed, Their story will remain a warning, because in the Australian outback distance hides everything, and sometimes evil doesn't need darkness, only opportunity. There are certain places in Australia that feel wrong the moment you arrive. The air grows still, sound feels muted, and time itself seems to hesitate. Hanging Rock is one of those places. Rising abruptly from the Victorian landscape, this ancient volcanic formation has watched humanity come and go for thousands of years. It has inspired myths, disappearances, and whispered warnings passed down for generations. In the early 1980s, one ordinary family traveled toward this place for a simple weekend escape. They packed food, they packed camping gear, they told friends they'd be back in 2 days. They never returned. What happened next would leave behind an abandoned car, unanswered questions, and a mystery the Australian wilderness has never given back. The family was ordinary in every way imaginable. A mother, a father, and their 2 young children. They lived a quiet suburban life and, like many Australian families, enjoyed weekend trips into nature. On a cool morning in the early 1980s, they loaded up their station wagon and headed north from Melbourne toward Hanging Rock. It was meant to be peaceful, a chance to connect with the outdoors. They planned to set up camp nearby, hike the famous rock formations during the day, and be safely back home by Sunday evening. Friends who saw them off later told investigators that nothing seemed unusual. There were no signs of arguments, no financial stress, no reason at all for them to just disappear. But as the kilometers passed, the familiar suburban landscape began to transform. The trees grew denser, the road narrowed, and in the distance, Hanging Rock loomed ahead, a dark, imposing silhouette against the sky. That was the last known journey the family ever made together. 2 days later, on that Sunday evening, concern turned into alarm. The family hadn't come home. Calls to their house went unanswered. Friends and relatives began to worry, and by the next morning, the police were officially notified. Search efforts began immediately, focusing on the main routes leading to the Hanging Rock Reserve. It didn't take long to find the car. It was parked on a dusty, isolated dirt access road, not far from the main trailhead. The scene was chillingly normal. The doors were unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside the vehicle were all their belongings: a picnic basket with uneaten food, warm clothing, and all their camping supplies. Nothing appeared to be stolen. Nothing looked damaged. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle. It looked for all the world as though the family had simply stepped out of the vehicle for a short walk and vanished. Search teams arrived quickly. Police officers, dedicated volunteers from nearby towns, and professional rescue units all converged on the area. They fanned out, meticulously searching the surrounding bushland, the winding trails, and the countless rock formations that give Hanging Rock its eerie character. Tracker dogs were brought in, and at first, the scent was clear, leading away from the car. But then it stopped, abruptly. In the middle of an open area, the dogs grew confused, circling aimlessly. It was as if the family had walked to that very spot and been lifted straight into the air. Helicopters scanned the rugged terrain from above, their rotors echoing off the ancient stone. Specialized teams explored dark caves and rappelled down into deep crevices, hoping to find any trace. But there was nothing. No discarded piece of clothing, no scuff marks, no footprints beyond that initial trail, and most disturbingly, no remains. The land, vast and silent, offered nothing back. As the days turned into a week, unsettling details began to surface from the search party itself. Some seasoned searchers reported hearing strange, low-humming sounds that seemed to emanate from the rock formations themselves, a vibration they could feel in their chests. Others found that their equipment suddenly malfunctioned in specific areas. Compasses spun wildly, refusing to point north. Two-way radios, working perfectly just moments before, crackled with indecipherable static or went completely dead. Perhaps most bizarrely, several volunteers reported that certain rocks felt inexplicably warm to the touch. Despite the cool weather and lack of direct sunlight, officials were quick to dismiss these strange reports. They attributed them to the stress of the search, fatigue, and overactive imaginations, but the locals were less convinced. They approached the police with quiet warnings, telling them that Hanging Rock was not a normal place. It had a history, they said. It had taken people before. Aboriginal elders had long spoken of the area with a deep sense of caution. Their stories, passed down through countless generations, described the land as a place where the boundary between our world and another was dangerously thin, a place where people could become lost without moving far at all. These weren't just ancient myths. More recent stories from locals supported this unease. They told of hikers who had lost hours of time, emerging from the rocks to find that the sun had moved impossibly far across the sky. They spoke of disembodied voices heard on the wind where no one stood, and a persistent, unnerving feeling of being watched by an unseen presence among the monolithic stones. The police, bound by procedure and logic, dismissed these stories as folklore, but no rational explanation could account for the family's disappearance. Foul play was considered, but there was no motive, no ransom note, and no evidence of violence. A planned disappearance was also floated, but why leave the car, the keys, and all their supplies behind? For people, 2 of them young children, don't simply vanish into thin air without a trace, unless something helps them. Weeks turned into months, and the official search was eventually scaled back, then called off entirely. The case files grew thick with reports, interviews, and maps, but they all led to the same dead end. No remains were ever recovered. No credible evidence was ever found linking the family to any crime or accident. There were no suspects. There were no witnesses after the car was discovered. The case quietly went cold. The files were archived, and the land returned to its brooding silence. But Hanging Rock remained, watching, waiting. Today, Hanging Rock continues to attract visitors. Tourists, hikers, and curious travelers come to climb its peaks and take in the dramatic views. But some locals, especially those from families who have lived in the area for generations, still refuse to go near it, particularly as dusk approaches. They say the land remembers, and that not all disappearances leave behind clues. Some only leave behind an absence or silence so complete, so profound, that it's impossible to ignore. Some mysteries end with answers, with a final chapter that brings closure. Others end only with questions that echo forever in the places they were born. The family who vanished near Hanging Rock left behind no evidence, no farewell, and no explanation. They left only a car parked on a lonely dirt road, and a place that refuses to speak, because in the vast Australian wilderness, there are locations far older than human reason, and some of them don't want to be understood. The Australian outback is not empty. It only looks that way. At night, the land stretches endlessly in every direction, swallowing sound, distance, and time itself. There are no streetlights, no landmarks, only darkness, and the stars. And sometimes lights appear where no lights should exist. They float just above the horizon. They move silently, and they wait. For more than a century, travelers across remote Australia have reported the same terrifying phenomenon. Glowing orbs known as the Min Min lights. Those who see them say the lights are intelligent. Those who follow them say the outback changes, and some who chase them are never seen again. The Min Min lights take their name from a small abandoned settlement in Queensland. In the early 1900s, stockmen traveling after dark began reporting strange lights hovering above the plains. They described glowing spheres, white, yellow, sometimes red. The lights would appear suddenly. They didn't flicker like lanterns. They didn't behave like stars. They moved with purpose. When riders stopped, the lights stopped. When they moved, the lights followed. At first, stories were dismissed as alcohol-fueled imagination, but reports kept coming, from people who had never met, who described the same thing, in the same places. Something was out there, and it was watching. As decades passed, encounters grew more disturbing. Drivers reported lights pacing their vehicles for kilometers, always just out of reach, always at the same distance, no matter how fast they drove. Some said the lights split into two, others said they vanished, only to reappear ahead. Engines stalled, compasses failed, roads seemed to stretch longer than they should. People began realizing the lights weren't chasing them, they were leading them. And if you followed, you might not find your way back. One of the most chilling encounters occurred when a lone driver stopped his vehicle to observe the lights. The orb approached slowly, silently, hovering just above the ground. He described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the light knew he was afraid. When he stepped out of his car, the light drifted backward, inviting him to follow. Against every instinct he did. He walked for hours. When he finally collapsed from exhaustion, the light vanished. Rescuers later found him over 40 kilometers from his vehicle, barefoot, disoriented, and unable to explain how he'd gotten there. Long before Europeans documented the Min Min lights, Aboriginal elders warned of them. They spoke of spirit lights, of guardians, of tricksters. The lights, they said, were not meant to be followed. They were tests, or warnings. Some stories claimed the lights led the unprepared into danger. Others said they guided souls who were already lost. Elders taught children to lie down and cover their eyes if the lights appeared, never chase them, never acknowledge them, because once the lights notice you, they don't forget. Over the years, some encounters ended far worse. Travelers vanished after reporting the lights. Vehicles were later found abandoned, fuel untouched, doors open, no signs of struggle. In each case, the same detail emerged. Witnesses recalled strange lights in the distance. Authorities blamed exposure, dehydration, and disorientation. But families weren't convinced. The outback is harsh, but it doesn't explain everything, especially not people who walk calmly into nothingness. Scientists have tried to explain the Min lights. Some suggest atmospheric refraction. Others blame swamp gas, bioluminescence, or distant headlights distorted by heat. But these explanations fail one key detail. The lights respond. They move intelligently, they maintain distance, they react to fear. No known natural phenomenon behaves that way, and no explanation accounts for the consistency of reports across more than 100 years. Even today, sightings continue. Truck drivers, tourists, police officers. Many refuse to speak publicly, others do with visible fear. They describe the same sensation, a feeling of being observed, a pull toward the light, an instinct screaming to run. Some obey that instinct, some don't, and the outback keeps its tally. The Min lights terrify people because they don't attack. They don't threaten, they don't force, they invite. And in a land where distance can kill you quietly, that invitation is deadly. The outback doesn't need monsters, it only needs you to make one mistake. If you ever find yourself alone in the Australian outback, and you see lights where there should be none, do not follow them, do not chase them, do not acknowledge them, because some lights are not there to guide you home. Some are there to see how far you're willing to go, before the darkness takes over. Forests are meant to feel alive, but Belanglo State Forest feels like it's holding its breath. The trees grow close together, the light barely reaches the ground, and sound seems to die before it can travel. Located just off Australia's Hume Highway, Belanglo is easy to reach, and terrifyingly easy to disappear in. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, travelers from across the world passed through this forest, unaware they were entering a hunting ground. They came looking for adventure, freedom, a story to tell when they got home. Instead, Belanglo became their final destination. This is the true story of the backpacker murders and the forest that helped hide them. During the late 1980s, Australia was a backpacker's dream. Open highways stretched endlessly. Hitchhiking was common and considered safe. Young travelers trusted strangers. Locals waved as cars passed. Danger felt distant. Backpackers followed predictable routes from Sydney to Melbourne, from coastal towns to inland stops. Belanglo State Forest sat directly along one of those routes. It was quiet, isolated, and invisible to those just passing through. Someone noticed that. Someone realized that the forest wasn't just scenery, it was cover. At first, no one noticed the pattern. Backpackers sometimes vanished. They ran out of money, changed plans, lost contact, but families back home began reporting missing loved ones. Letters stopped. Phone calls never came. Some travelers were last seen hitchhiking. Others were reported entering vehicles with friendly strangers. Their journeys simply ended, and no one knew why. In September 1992, a jogger entered Belanglo State Forest. What he found would change everything: a human skull. Police were called as searches expanded. More remains were discovered, scattered, hidden, and deliberately concealed. The victims were young, foreign, and had been dead for years. This was no accident. This was murder, and not just one. As remains were identified, the scale of the crimes became clear. 7 backpackers had been murdered. Some were shot. Some were stabbed. Some were bound before being killed. Autopsies revealed extreme violence. In some cases, victims were forced to kneel. Others were chased through the forest before their deaths. This wasn't quick. This wasn't impulsive. This was deliberate. Investigators reconstructed the killer's method. He offered rides to backpackers. He appeared friendly, helpful, trustworthy. Once they were deep inside the forest, the mood changed. Weapons were produced. Victims were restrained. Control was established. This wasn't about robbery. Belongings were often left behind. This was about dominance and fear. Suspicion began circling one man, Ivan Malott, a local with a history of violence. He lived near the backpacker routes. He owned weapons, and witnesses placed him near victims. Police searched his home. What they found was damning. Firearms, ropes, personal items belonging to missing backpackers. The pieces finally began to fit. In 1994, Ivan Malott was arrested. Australia watched closely. The man accused of terrorizing travelers had been living an ordinary life. Neighbors were stunned. Friends expressed disbelief, but the evidence kept mounting. Milat denied everything. He claimed innocence, but the forest told a different story. The trial began in 1996. The courtroom fell silent as details were revealed. The brutality, the planning, the suffering. Families listened as prosecutors described how their loved ones had died. Milat showed no remorse, no emotion. He was found guilty of 7 murders. The sentence, 7 consecutive life terms. He would never walk free. Even after the conviction, questions lingered. Some disappearances were never explained. Some evidence didn't align. Investigators suspected Milat may not have acted alone. He never confessed, and he never revealed everything he knew. Belanglo Forest still contains areas never fully searched. Some believe it still holds victims. Milat spent his final years in prison. He remained defiant. At times, he taunted authorities. He destroyed his own finger in a failed escape attempt, but he never cooperated. In 2019, Ivan Milat died. He took his secrets with him. For some families, closure died with him. Today, Belanglo State Forest is still open. People hike, camp, pass through, but locals avoid certain areas. They say the forest feels heavy, as if it remembers, as if it knows what happened beneath its trees. The backpacker murders shattered Australia's sense of safety. Trust vanished overnight. Hitchhiking faded. The idea of a friendly stranger became dangerous, because this case proved something terrifying. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows, sometimes it smiles. Belanglo Forest never spoke. It hid the bodies, muted the screams, and watched investigators struggle to uncover the truth. The forest didn't kill anyone, but it made sure the killer had time. The backpacker murders remind us of a simple truth. Sometimes the danger isn't the wilderness, it's the people who know how to use it. Belanglo Forest remains quiet, but silence doesn't mean innocence, and in some places, the land remembers everything. Thank you for watching The Dark and Strange.